Okay, we're back, and those that are observant amongst us will notice that there's been a slight change in colour. I was debating whether the original XF81 that I used for the forest green was too dull in colour, and I modified some XF5 flat green to represent the forest green colour more closely. So all I've done is, using the same techniques as laying down the original camo colours, is I basically traced the outlines and then filled in the centres, just exactly the same as we had seen in the last video, and it seems to work fine, and I'm really happy with the colour. So moving on from that, I sealed all the colours with X22, just a very thin coat of X22. Don't want it high gloss, it's more of a semi-gloss satin sheen, which is just perfect for laying down decals. And the decals is the next option. There isn't too many. We've got the national insignias, we've got the tail codes, not using the propeller hazard ends because I've already done the propeller. So there's the prop there, and we will be using the walkways because they work fine in the other one. We've got some propeller decals there as well. So I'll get the ones cut out we need, and then I'll show you how I apply them. So that's all the decals cut out, and we've got a grand total of 31 decals to do, which really, compared to some aircraft these days, is really not much. So some plain decal water. You can have it warm if you want, but it doesn't make a huge amount of difference. And all I do, get the decal in, leave it soak a moment. Now, what I've been testing recently for decaling, I used to use, well, I do use Microset and Microsol. But what I picked up when I was last away in Edinburgh for a meeting was Mr. Mark Setter and Mr. Mark Softer from Mr. Hobby products. So I used these for the last Skyraider I built. It seemed to work pretty well with the Tamiya decals, and we all know that Tamiya decals can be a little thick and tricky to apply. So anything that helps the decaling process along is worth its weight in gold. So we'll start with the prop ones. You can see that the water's already started to take the numbering off the decal. And we can try moving them on the backing paper. They're not quite ready to move. What we also need to get is a clean cotton bud or Q-tip, and just moisten it slightly with your spittle. You don't want it bone dry because it could actually rip the decal when you go to put it on. So I always try and test to see if it was moving on the backing paper, which it is now, which is good. So it's Mr. Mark Setter we used first. So this softens, but also helps set the decal or decal, whichever way you want to pronounce it. I actually need to get the instructions to see the exact location for the propeller ones. Bear with me. There we go. So you can see here, that's where our number 15 decals are going, towards the bottom end of the paddle blade propeller. So I'll just move that back. So that's in shot. So all we do is we get some of the softer, and we just want to paint it on where we want it to go. We don't need to overload it. If there's too much, just wick it a little away with a brush. You just want a good layer. So this is going to help soften this decal to form, which is not too bad because it's a reasonably flat surface. But what we do want is to help it stick, and this does that. Place the decal down. When we're happy with its location, the moistened cotton bud we can set in and wick away some of the setting solution, and then we can look at maneuvering it into the middle of the blade gently. I like to use a little bit of tweezers. You can use a cocktail stick, just whatever you're happy using, and then when you're happy with its location, gently take the cotton bud and roll it over and see how it's worked the decal down onto the part and removed all the water from underneath. When that's there, take the softer, just wick away the bulk of it on the side of the jar and then apply that to the decal. If you've got too much and it's pooling, just use the cotton bud to remove it. There we go. And with props then just stick it down and rotate it so you're working in the same orientation each time. And we just carry on like this until we've applied all the decals. Now if you want, you can take the paper over and slide the part straight off the paper onto the plastic. That's fine. This is just how I choose to do it. And everyone's got their own ways they like and don't like. Okay, when we're happy with the positioning, take the cotton bud, gently roll it down to help that decal conform. Then come in with the softer and a gentle application. Now be careful when you're putting these chemicals on that you don't move the decal, and be careful you don't flood it, because you don't want to melt the decal and actually melt into the paint, because some of these decal solutions can be quite aggressive. That's always turn that compressor off. Yeah, that's why a lot of people like to put down a gloss coat or a varnish coat over the finished paint, just to give us a level of protection for the parts, to avoid decal solutions burning into the paint and damaging the finish. So, roll that out. Tamiya decals can be quite hit and miss. Sometimes they can be okay, and sometimes they can be challenging. For any of you that's been watching my Tacom AH61 Apache build, you will know that those jet decals are thoroughly challenging, to the point that I have stepped away from the kit for a little while because I was so fed up with the quality and the finish I was getting with the decals. I will be revisiting it shortly because I want to get it finished and get it off and away from my workbench. Right, so that's how I'll be approaching the decaling for this kit. And we'll zoom in. And there you see the decals nicely laid down. And well conformed to the part. So I've got the rest of these decals to do. I'll apply them, get them sealed down, and then we'll come back and we'll look at what we're going to do for weathering. Okay, we're back. Now, I've kind of pressed ahead since our last video. So I have obviously applied the decals, and they've been sealed in with a very thin, or a couple of thin coats of Tamiya X22 clear, and that's been sprayed not heavy enough to create a true gloss coat, more of a satin finish, which is going to work in for the weathering stage. Now that's been allowed to dry for 24 hours, and then I've moved on to weathering, and this is oil weathering. So I've got my neat oils on the cardboard, and I have a homemade very light oil pin wash of the same two colours. So that's Abtai Lungs 502. So we've got cream brown and the smoke. And the why I mix that is you get a really nice sort of light grey off brown colour, so it's not as stark as a true black or true smoke pan line wash, and it goes across all the colours quite evenly, and you don't need to vary just too much between the camouflage colours and the pin wash to get the pan lines to highlight. Now in order to get the, obviously I've painted on with a brush, so I use just a synthetic Daler and Rowley liner brush, a number 1 liner brush, for applying the pin wash. That's gone over and it's sat for a couple hours to flash off, and to take it off I like to use AKE Interactive Odeless Thinners. If I don't use that, then I can also use Winsor & Newton oil colour Sansador as a solvent to lift it off, and that's quite paint safe when it comes to acrylics. It doesn't lift the acrylics or dissolve the acrylics. So I've been working, just testing the colours out on the ordnance. You can see here, so the bombs, I've gone for a kind of a dusty look. If we can focus on that. And then for the larger bombs, same look, but I've mixed a bit of the smoke in it just to give it a different sort of hue. And you can see there's a little bit of streaking on the pylon. And then for the central fuel tank, we have gone, interestingly, Tamiya doesn't, I'll just back that up there. Tamiya doesn't call out for the fuel filler cap to be painted red, but a lot of the times they were, so we've just gone for that to give it a highlight detail. And then we've got some fuel spillages running around both sides of the tank, and then settling on the centre of the bottom of the tank and dripping off onto the floor. So I am actually also going to do some oil drips from the engine, because radial engines were notoriously oily engines. So we're going to do some of that, but we'll need to get the line of the oil drips onto that, so we're putting it in the right place. And then obviously the Zumi rockets, just the same oil wash. It's not really shown much, but it has highlighted the detail on both ends. So last components is the front wheel well hatches, simple oil wash. So what do we do once we've applied the wash and let it dry? Well, first thing I like to do, and it's a good test on how tough the finish is I like to just get a piece of plain dry kitchen towel or light blue paper, so anything that doesn't shed too much fibres, and just rub back and forth in the direction of airflow, and you'll see immediately how much of the oil pin wash is going to come off. And you can do the same with enamels. I quite like working with enamels, and I make my own enamel pin washes up that you can buy proprietary brands. Oils and enamels behave in a very similar fashion. So you just wipe down the wing surface. You can go at 90 degrees just to try and get all the bulk of the pin wash away. You can see it coming away in there, but always finish going in the direction of flow, so if there is any streaking it looks natural. Carefully do the flap, make sure you support the back of it, you don't snap it off. And it will get to a point where you can only remove so much. And I think you can see we're pretty much at that point there. It's the same on the underside, so we'll just focus on the one wing. And you've got to watch because there's a little bit of protrusions on the underside, so you know they will tear at the towel. You don't want to leave fibers on the model. You can see that the off grey brown wash highlights the panels beautifully without being too in your face. You can also see, as it's a satin finish, then the oil tends to take quite a good grip to the paint, and you have to work reasonably hard to get it to work, to lift and blend, because this is what we're basically doing, is we're blending. We will be removing a certain amount of it, but the stuff that is quite absorbed into the finish coat, the satin finish coat, then we're working at it and blending it in, so that ultimately we get a finish where it brings back the tonal variation in the paint. We've got the panel lines highlighted, and then we've got a little bit of weathering on it. Now you can see the other beauty of oil paints is that if you've got a satin finish and you apply oil paints, then it will leave pretty much a dead matte finish, which is really fine. It saves putting any more varnish coats on the model, building up the paint finish, and possibly obscuring detail. Now, what do we do if we've got some stubborn detail that won't go? Well, we can see we've wiped it in every possible direction, so now's the time where we want to start thinking if we have to blend in panel lines. Now, always working with a brush in the airflow direction. If you need to moisten an area, just gently moisten it, come back in with a tissue. But what we could also do is, you don't want to, unless you're doing say the dot filter technique, you don't want to completely load your brush up. You want to just catch, wick the thinners into the brush, and then get yourself a clean dry piece of paper, and you can see the thinners coming off the brush there, and you want to basically brush that in there. Depending on how much you want to take off, I want to take a good amount off, but leave some. If you want to take it all off, you can just go in with a wet brush, but I don't know that, so you go just until it's leaving a bare mark. But when you go back to the model, you can see straight away that it's still enough moisture in the brush to reactivate any of the wash that's there. You can clean, for example, a single panel, or you can clean the whole area, or you can go into these panels and then just streak, and whatever oil is in the recesses there will naturally be picked up and streaked back across the airframe. If there's any areas where you think the panel line's still overly highlighted, you can just gently rub the panel and then come with a blending brush, a soft blending brush, and then just blend it back. And then that then leaves you a beautifully highlighted panel line, but just softens the contrast where your pin wash has been. Now, if you wanted to, you can just go in with this moist brush and clean up the pan lines individually. So you just use the tip of the brush and a little round sort of movements, rotating movements. You just work the paint back into the pan line. Every now and again, go back to the cloth, clean it off. You'll see that it's taken the paint off the bristles of the brush. You go back in. So this is a bit slower as the other technique, but it gives you a different finish, because as you're doing this and working the paint back into the panel lines, obviously you're spreading it across the rest of the panel, and it's helping to break the panel up with regards to staining, boot marks, dirt, grime. And when you get to a point you think, oh, it's not too bad, but you want to just soften it, just take your blending brush. You can either blend it back over the wing, or you can do like a stabbing motion. If you stab, try and be in a random pattern and rotate the brush as you do it to avoid any patterns forming, and then you can get the nice softened edges, but you also retain a bit of grime and dirt on the panels. So there's two different ways you can tackle oil weathering, and the beauty with oil weathering is if you don't like it, just use the brush with neat thinners on it and wipe it all off, and you're pretty much down to original paint before the oil weathering. Let it dry off and you start again. So I am going to continue on the airframe. I'm probably going to continue doing this technique in the first instance, until I've covered all the surfaces. Go. So there's that side and there's that side. So this is obviously a very clean side, whereas this is a bit more mucky and used. If you feel you've taken too much paint off, what you can do is you can come back in with your pin wash, or if you want to dirty up a panel, just get some neat oil on the panel. And you can mix both oils. And you really are only using small amounts of it. You don't want to use a lot. Get your brush and then start coming back in. And you want the stabbing motion or a circular motion. That's you putting the grime back into that panel areas where your footfall's been, where you've got natural accumulations of dust settling on it. Darkening down the panel, you can see straight away the tone and the hue of the panel has changed. Get your blending brush. There we go. If you want to make more of an impression, then just wicking a little bit of thinners again onto the brush, and you are just wicking the merest amount of thinners. You don't need to flood the brush. Okay, clean the brush again. You just need enough to activate the paint a little bit, and then just dab it. And you can see straight away the areas that it's lifting the paint up from. So you've got that paint reactivated, and then come back in with your blending brush and just a stabbing motion. Draw back at the end of the wing and pick up a little bit off that panel line. There we go. So that's that area dirtied up. If you want to go in quite heavy on the non-slip strips, starting with smoke, get that dark colour in first. Touch in with a bit of the light cream. Okay, get your brush. You could use a brown brush if you want, so that's a Daler & Rowley number 6 round. And then just again you want stabbing motions, because this is footfall here, so, and that will blend that non-slip and weather it in. You can drag back and you can extend past a little bit. If you've got moisture on the tea towel, you can use that to clean the paint off the brush. That will reactivate your brush a little bit. And if you want to keep it just neat to the edge, then just use your other brush. It's a bit stiffer, just to push that paint back onto the anti-slip. Blending it in across the wing root. Now the other tool you can use when you're doing this, if you think you've got enough in or too much on the panel and you want to remove it, is get a Q-tip or cotton bud, wherever you come from in the world, and then you can use that. And it's quite precise, and that'll help you clean off the panel. There you go. If you still think there's too much, back in with your brush, just slightly moisten it again. Excuse me for knocking the camera. So back in with the brush, and just when you're going away from a wing root, you're going to have to brush up the way. Focus on that panel, moving it back up to the panel line, and then you can blend the panel line. You can always come in with your towel and blend it away that way, and dab just to dry it off, and like set you up again. Streak that back down. And you will find that airframes, most airframes will be streaked down the way, because a lot of the time the aircraft just sit on the runways. So think about the way the rain and dirt will fall, and streak it down the way. And if you want, you can use your blending brush just to soften all that blend. It's just difficult when you're dealing with a wing root. You will have to clean the brush at some point. Again, that's where your stabbing motions come in, because that'll help orientate the bristles down and clean the end of the stroke up, so you're not left with a big tide line at the top of the wing root. There we go. So a few bits here to clean up. And that's how I'm dealing with the oil weathering. So I'm going to go over the whole airframe, blend it all in, and then we'll come back and we'll look at actually getting the ordnance and such fixed on before we go and do some more final weathering. So that'll be exhaust staining and oil staining, and we're going to put in some streaks, some very specific streaks, to make them more defined than just the general oil weathering that we're doing at the moment. So we'll just see you back in a little moment.